Today I'm going to show you how I build this sliding carriage to make crosscuts in a more comfortable and precise way with a table saw. This is the second in a series of 5 videos about my new woodworking bench with a table saw and router table. I'll start by showing you how to use the sliding carriage and all it can offer. The first advantage of the carriage is that it gives me more working space to cut large pieces. I fix the carriage with 4 screws for when I'm not using it. Once unscrewed, the carriage slides with relative ease. For the carriage's linear motion, I thought about using linear bearings, but since I wanted a robust bench top to work on, not just for cutting, in the end I decided to use aluminum miter channels. The other prerequisite I had was to have everything on the front of the workbench without anything sticking out. In this way, I find the design more comfortable for using the sliding carriage or the table saw fence, as well as for working on top of it. I'm going to place the carriage fence to make some cuts. It's very easy. You only need to use a block of wood as a stop and tighten both adjustable handles. This is the miter track stop I'll be using with the fence. I'm going to cut this piece of pine wood down to a length of 90 centimeters. I adjust the miter track stop accordingly, and now I only have to slide the carriage to achieve a clean cut. The fence can be turned like this for angular cuts. Of course, the T-track profiles I've used to secure the fence can also be used to hold the workpieces. The carriage has a cutting depth of about 40 centimeters without the need for supports on the front, but to cut deeper, I have to use this drawer I installed under the carriage. It's very easy to operate. You only need to prop your left leg up against it and move the rest of your body along with it. Using this system, I can achieve a cutting depth of approximately 73 centimeters. And that's not all. The carriage fence is extendable, allowing us to cut pieces up to 165 centimeters long. In this animation, you can see the 3D CAD file included in the plans for sale on my website. Also, you can see what the workbench will look like once finished. Now I'll show you how to make the sliding carriage. First, I'll install this T-track on the front of the bench. I can use it to insert clamps to secure workpieces. I'll use my plunge saw and its guide to make the groove in several cuts. Now with a hand saw and a jigsaw, I'll finish the recess on the back of the bench where the carriage will slide. I'll cut the bottom part of the carriage to size and make sure it fits in its recess. On the front of the bench I need 1 more millimeter of depth, and I'm going to solve that with a router. Now I need to screw on this middle piece to reinforce the bench top. I double check the measurements of the miter channel that will allow me to move the carriage, and I cut a groove to insert it with the bench table saw. I cut the channel in several runs, ensuring I don't cut too deep or too wide. Following the same steps, I make a groove for the second miter channel. It's important to prop the edge of the piece against the saw fence to ensure the miter channels are parallel to one another. In my case, I need 0.5 millimeter more depth, so I'm going to use a router plane to solve this. With the plunge saw, I finish machining a recess for the miter channel on the bench frame. I can't use the holes that come with the miter channel, so I'll have to make new ones. I've thought about fastening the channel and the plywood piece at the same time using only 3 screws. One goes in the center, right over the small piece I screwed to the bench a moment ago, and the other 2 will go in each of the frames. I drill some holes for the threaded inserts that will allow me to lock the sliding carriage in place when not in use. I apply 3 coats of varnish on the plywood piece to protect it, as well as to make it slide more smoothly. After some final adjustments to ensure the piece is level and at the same height as the frames, I screw it into place. In order to ensure the sliding carriage works properly, it's very important that this piece and the rest of the upper parts of the bench are flat, so I'll double check to make sure. This table comes with a lever to quickly attach and remove the riving knife. I'll tighten its steel cable so that it takes less travel to operate, as I don't have a lot of space. It's time to lock the table saw into its emplacement. First, I try to adjust it to the proper depth. The most important part is to make it so that the miter channels I just installed are parallel with the saw's built-in channels. Using a block of wood and a square, I verify whether the distance at the front and at the back of the channels is the same. After this adjustment, I mark the positions of the holes that come with the saw to place some threaded inserts on the shelf. I remove the shelf and drill the necessary holes. I place the inserts and screw the shelf to the workbench. After some final checks, I cut some blocks of wood that will help me position the saw if I need to remove it one day. This way, it will always remain in the same position, parallel to the miter channels I've installed. I glue them on with cyanoacrylate, and when it's dry, I remove the shelf again to fasten some screws and strengthen the bond. Now I'll make the fence that we'll use with the sliding carriage. First, I'll cut this L-shaped aluminum profile to size. I drill the necessary holes to attach it to the workbench. With a router, I make a channel that will let me place the fence at an angle. This could be done with a coping saw and a file. In fact, I think it would even be a better option. To join the 2 pieces together, I'll use this combination of a nut and screw. I'm going to cut another section of the profile where I'll insert 2 steel pipes which will let me extend the fence. I clean all of the parts with solvent and I'll glue on the 2 pipes and this aluminum profile with epoxy resin. Now I'll cut and shape this piece of HPL panel that will allow me to lock the extendable part of the fence. It's not the fastest locking mechanism I've seen, but with these kinds of pieces I haven't been able to design anything more versatile. I use epoxy again to stick this HPL piece, and I thread it. I test out the fence's extendable system and it seems to be working okay. Now I'll cut the pieces for the base of the sliding carriage. I'm going to use a piece of birch plywood screwed to another piece of this material I'm cutting. It's similar to MDF, but harder and with melamine on both sides. For the original design, I used a single 18mm piece of hard plywood, also a perfectly valid option. I cut grooves for the T-tracks with a table saw. I finish adjusting the grooves by hand with a router plane. I fasten the profile to the carriage with screws. These screws will also join the plywood and the MDF pieces together. It's time to cut the sliders that will act as guides for the carriage. I'm going to use HPL, but some kinds of hardwood, Teflon, or other types of plastic boards could work as well. After drilling holes in them and making sure they're the right size, I attach them to the carriage with cyanoacrylate glue. I've placed some washers in the miter channel that act as spacers. Now I'll put the bench table saw at the same height as the carriage and the other part of the station, where the router table will be installed. To do that, I've cut some pieces of plywood. Apart from that, we could also use 1 or 2 pieces of EVA rubber. With this, and by tightening the screws that secure the saw, we could get a few more extra millimeters so that we can adjust the saw's height more accurately. It's time to cut the pieces to make the drawer that acts as a support base for the sliding carriage. I'll use some fairly robust full extension drawer slides. The manufacturer specifies that they can hold up to 80 kilograms. I make a hole for the threaded insert and use a jig to assemble the drawer with screws. I'm going to use some small pieces of board with the appropriate measurements to place the drawer slides in a more comfortable and precise way. After fixing the drawer in place with screws, I make the other piece on which the sliding carriage will rest. I make sure it's at the right height, but later on, when all the work is done, I'll come back to check and adjust it again. I'm going to put the self-adhesive measuring tape on the fence. First, I'll cut a piece of plywood to any length, but making sure it's exact, and using the miter track stop. The next step is to attach the measuring tape using the stop as a reference. These kinds of stops usually have a micro adjustment system, so I can come back and readjust it as needed. Finally, I'll make sure the carriage can make square cuts. To do that, I'll cut a 60 centimeter wide board strip lengthwise. I turn the piece and repeat the process. If everything is okay, the resulting board strip should have the exact same measurements at the entry and exit points of the cut. That's all for today. In a few days I'll post the third video, where I'll be showing you how to make the router table. See you soon.